Well, let's talk to Theo Usherwood. He is a political commentator who's going to bring us through the really big political stories of the day. Theo, it's great to have you with us. And the story, of course, about Elon Musk saying that he will possibly give $100 million to Nigel Farage. That would be a bit of a game changer, wouldn't it?
It would be a complete game changer, Peter. Good morning. Yes, there is some suggestion that Elon Musk, having changed the election fundamentally in the United States by coming out for Donald Trump and allowing his platform X to be used as a way of spreading the Trump message to millions, tens of millions of voters across the United States, could now be about to actually bankroll Nigel Farage and reform UK. Nigel Farage has a huge way to go if he is to become Prime Minister. Reform only have 5 MPs. There's a by-election coming up, quite possibly, and that could, in the north of England, that could perhaps give Reform another MP. But they need a game-changing moment. And if Elon Musk decides to get behind Nigel Farage, firstly with the money, which is crucial, and £100 million, it would have to come through X's base here in the United Kingdom in order to get around quite strict rules which prohibit foreign donors from giving huge amounts of money to British political parties. But if he was to decide to do that, firstly, it would be a huge boon for Nigel Farage in terms of finances. But it's the platform that Elon Musk could offer Nigel Farage that I think will be of most interest for the Reform UK leader. We saw the way when there was some insinuation that YouTube was putting down podcast videos that Donald Trump had done with the likes of Joe Rogan and Sean Ryan, where he was coming back on the Democrat message. Elon Musk promoted those podcasts with the Republican candidate to great effect so that he could get around the likes of YouTube, but also the mainstream media. And if it's, we know that Elon Musk doesn't like Keir Starmer. We know that he doesn't like the Labour government. He's been perfectly plain about that over the course of the last 5 months. If he comes out now and actually lends X to Reform UK to promote their messages and to promote their retorts to the British government, that could be very, very significant.
We'll see what happens. There's a story in the Sunday Times today about ministers being prepared to consider allowing more EU students into Britain in exchange for closer economic ties with Brussels to boost sluggish growth. What do you make of this story, Theo?
Well, I think what people need to understand about this story is that we want closer economic ties with the European Union. But every time you go into business or try and do a negotiation with the European Union, they want something back, Peter. They demand, it's like a club. It's like a squash club. And if you want to be a member of a squash club, then you need to play by their rules. And their rules are, well, you can have close economic ties with us, but in return, we want something back. And what they want is they want a youth mobility scheme. Of course, the likes of the Tories and Nigel Farage, again, we're talking about him, are going to say, hang on a moment, the British people back in 2016 voted for tighter controls on immigration. We've had figures out where actually this week net migration rose to, for the year previously, went up to north of 900,000. Then it was seen as a some sort of good thing that they'd reduced by 20%. But actually, net migration is now more than 700,000 for the last year. And if we suddenly turn around and say to the European Union, OK, we want closer economic ties, that's fine, then there's going to be a problem because they're going to want something in return. And that's going to be a youth mobility scheme, which, is in effect, like it or loathe it, it's immigration higher immigration via the back door. And I'd also just say this. Donald Trump has been very astute in saying that actually what he wants to see, Peter, is he wants to see, tariffs introduced against large countries like China, like the European Union. And previously, when we actually left the European Union, he was very supportive of the idea of actually striking a trade deal with the UK. Now, it would mean, of course, making concessions to US trade negotiators, but there is potentially quite a beneficial deal to be done there if we, rather than look to Europe, look to the United States.
Well, that's a very, very good point. There's a big story in the Mail on Sunday today. In fact, it's their front page story about Liz Kendall. Now, some might argue it's actually not that much of a story because in these second homes that these politicians get, well, actually, we pay their fuel bills and we have for a long time. But actually, when you look into the detail of it, it is very, very pertinent to the many people who feel very, very annoyed about politicians, the lives they lead versus the lives that real people on the streets, normal people, viewers and listeners of this station will lead. Because Liz Kendall, who's the Work and Pension Secretary, well, she axed those winter fuel payments. She's the minister behind it. Yet her own £350 a month energy bills are paid by the taxpayer. By the way, she lives in a London mansion which costs £4 million. Theo.
Yeah, so, Liz Kendall, what she's effectively done is she needs two homes. She needs a constituency home, and she's claiming the energy bills from reading the Mail on Sunday article on her home up in Leicester, which is, of course, her constituency home, to the tune of nearly £4,000 for the year. The highest bill is £350. This is at a time, Peter, when pensioners are losing between £100 and £300 in their winter fuel allowance. By her department's own estimations, 100,000 pensioners are going to be plunged into fuel poverty by 2027. Liz Kendall's turning around and saying, well, I haven't broken the rules and these are benefits that are open to all MPs. But if you remember when Therese Coffey, who was the Work and Pension Secretary, was caught singing karaoke Time of My Life at the Tory party conference, the outcry, the outrage, because of course it had come off the back of cuts to universal credit. The sauce is good for the goose, it's good for the gander. Labour don't have a monopoly on self-righteousness here. If you set your standards high and you want to jump up and down about standards in public life and the fact that it was the mean old Tories that cut universal credit and then were seen celebrating, you need to adhere to the same rules. And I would have thought, Peter, that adhering to the same rules would be, if you're going to cut winter fuel allowance for millions of pensioners, fine, but hold yourself to the standard. If you can certainly afford it, then you shouldn't be claiming to the tune of £4,000 your own winter fuel bills, which are picked up by the taxpayer. And I think Labour again are falling into this trap where they think that they can dish out the lessons on moral superiority, or what it is, to hold high standards in public office. That's fine, you can do that, but you have to live by those standards. And interestingly, Nigel Farage has come out and he's tying them in knots, because he's turning around and saying, well, I can afford it, therefore I'm not going to claim that benefit.
Well, on that point of Mr. Rules himself, Keir Starmer, he's going to have a big reset later this week, and just with a proviso that Theo might have to cut you off in a second because Victoria Atkins, the Shadow Environment Secretary, will be with us in just a second. Let's see what Pat McFadden, who's Starmer's right-hand man, said about Louise Hay. This is the former Transport Secretary who had to resign this week. He was challenged on this on Sky News this morning. Let's have a look.
I don't know that. I only know what I've read in the newspapers in the last few days.
Steady. You're telling me they put you out on Sunday morning and they didn't tell you what the Prime Minister knew. I mean, that in itself feels like... How can you do that?
Look, Lou Haig is a good colleague. I'm sorry to see that she's gone. I think she was doing a good job.
That is Pat McFadden there, who is the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster. What do you make of that answer, Theo? I only know what I've read in the papers. I mean, he was sent out by the government. He's Keir Starmer's right-hand man. He's saying he doesn't know what Keir Starmer knew. I mean, Pat McFadden didn't have time to do an interview with us this morning. I would have done exactly what Trevor Phillips did there on Sky News. He did the right thing by saying, seriously?
Yeah, so just to underscore, most of your listeners won't know who Pat McFadden is. He is probably the third or fourth most important person in government. Where by sending out Pat McFadden, they haven't sent out a junior minister. He's in the Quad. He sits on all of the most important committees. He knows everything that's going on in Downing Street. He knows everything that's going on in Whitehall.
I don't know about you, Theo, but I would say the four most important people in the government are Keir Starmer, Angela Rayner, Pat McFadden and Morgan McSweeney. And Morgan McSweeney is the Chief of Staff. Would you agree with that?
And if you wanted to add a fifth, I'd add in Rachel Reeves.
Rachel Reeves, So really important guy who says he doesn't know what Keir Starmer knew about the Transport Secretary, perhaps not being entirely forthcoming. She would deny that, of course, in regard to why she resigned.
And the reason that this has the potential to come back and bite Keir Starmer really badly is that Lou Haig is of the left of the Labour Party. She has a huge amount of support amongst the trade unions. They were delighted when she became Transport Secretary because, of course, she doled out 14% pay rises to the RMT, and that was without any reforms as a stipulation for accepting that 14% pay rise as part of £10 billion of public sector pay rises. She went into government and she did that as Transport Secretary. And now she's sitting on the back benches. And if you look at that letter, she's got no hope of return to government. But she was adamant that when she joined Keir Starmer's shadow cabinet back in 2020, she disclosed in full what had happened back in 2013, 2014, when she claims that she lost her mobile phone, which of course was subsequently found again. And that's why Keir Starmer and Number 10 are insisting that new information came to light as a result of the Times story, and that's why she had to resign. But I think if it actually turns out, Peter, that there's no new information of particular substance to all of this, that actually Lou Haig can prove that she was fully transparent with Keir Starmer, then the question is, why did Keir Starmer appoint her to his shadow cabinet? And then why did he allow her to join his cabinet in a senior position? Transport Secretary, most people think that's a junior position. That's a senior position, especially when you're looking at such widespread public sector reforms.
Let's just remind ourselves that Keir Starmer was the man who said during Partygate that law breakers can't be lawmakers. He is the same person who decided that Louise Haig, who, look, sure, spent conviction, that's fine, but then it became public and then she had to resign. I wonder what changed, really. I'd love to ask Keir Starmer, what changed? So you knew all this stuff, then it became public, and simply the fact it became public, you weren't embarrassed about it enough not to make her Transport Secretary. I still think there are quite a few questions for him. There'll be more questions this week about his plan for change. They're saying it's not a reset, it's simply something they planned in regard to their missions. I mean, I'm not sure missions mean an awful lot to a lot of people, but actually there's a lot of quite crunchy policy coming down the track. A big speech from Keir Starmer on Thursday coming up, Theo. What can we expect?
Look, he's going to talk about turning the oil tanker and the British public expecting ruthlessness when it comes to getting the job done in government. A couple of points on this. Do you remember when Keir Starmer launched his missions? He announced his missions, his first 5 missions. It was back in February of this year. And of course, because they didn't keep to that narrative, everybody forgot what they were. I actually had to look them up this morning. And this is my life looking, following politics, and you had to look them up to actually read what they were and around, reforming the justice system, economic growth, National Health Service. But the problem that Keir Starmer has is that actually, he's not doing what he's going to be talking about on Thursday, because it's very difficult to see how you can bring this ruthless efficiency to government to get the reforms that to secure the reforms Keir Starmer is talking about. When you actually look at how much time Keir Starmer has spent in Whitehall. He spent more than 2 weeks, Peter, on a plane to various summits around the world. That's just on the plane. That's not actually at the summit. That's talking about a plane to the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting in Samoa. We're talking about a plane to COP29 in Baku. And the problem he's got is that unless he lives by what he's preaching, and you've been I hope you don't mind me saying, you've been a special advisor in government, right? Yep. So you know how civil servants love to do their own thing.
Oh, totally. They often see politicians as a bit of an inconvenience, getting in the way.
Exactly. So if you want to deliver for the British people, you need to be in there micromanaging it, asking for updates, getting reports back, following up on emails, following up on meetings with your permanent secretaries or your chief of staff or your cabinet secretary to make sure that stuff gets done. And you can't do that as if you're, and I respect, you know, Keir Starmer says he's got lots of important meetings around the world with world leaders, but you can't do that if for every summit you personally jet off around the world to meet, you know. And if you look at the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting, that wasn't attended by the vast majority, certainly the senior prime ministers of Commonwealth countries. If you look at what happened in Baku at the COP29 summit, you know, China, India, the US didn't send their leaders to those summits. And so you have to ask yourself, you know, if Keir Starmer wants to deliver, he needs to be back at base in his office, in number 10, in Whitehall, really, you know, running the rule over everything that government is doing, because otherwise it's very difficult to see how he's going to be successful.
Theo, you're absolutely right. You talk a lot of sense. Theo Usherwood there, political commentator. Thank you to him.